This is Sarah. Sarah's a fifth-year graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in neuroscience. Once she gets her PhD, she wants to get a scientist position in a biotech firm. Now, Sarah, like most scientists, has to give a lot of talks. Talks to her lab mates, talks to people inside and outside of her discipline, talks to potential funders and collaborators and policymakers and actually the public. And she wants these talks to be interesting, to inform and influence, and to impress the audience. And she knows that in order to do that, her talks have to engage. They have to get the audience to process what it is that she's saying, and ultimately, they need to understand the content. Because if the audience doesn't understand what it is that she's talking about, well, there's really no reason to give the talk. Recently, Sarah was asked to give a short talk, like 5 minutes, to grad students in order to recruit them to her laboratory. And she said yes, but with some trepidation because she'd seen these talks before and she knew how they were prepared. The speaker would take 5 years of research, beautiful but complex and voluminous research, and then load it onto PowerPoint slides, and then try to jam it all into the time allotted. More often than not, at about 2 minutes, the audience would get really perplexed and glaze over. And this made Sarah wonder, is there a better way? So when she heard there was a video series that taught how to create talks using tools and principles of story, she jumped at the chance. And once she signed up, her question was, will these videos help me create a 5-minute talk that is engaging and understandable? She started right in gathering up the things that she'd need. Story form template, grid of squares, pencil, pen, scissors, feedback rubric, and then somebody to give her feedback. Normally, this is a group of people, but Sarah had me. Then the videos asked Sarah to focus on her audience and decide on one main thing she wanted her audience to understand by listening to her talk. Then she cut out little squares of paper and drew icons of the things the audience would need to learn in order to understand that one main thing. This was a bit weird, but it really wasn't very hard. As a matter of fact, the very act of drawing helped her think of what the audience would need to see and process. And it got her to think in a way that was fluid and visual and tangible. Sarah started to map out her research journey using the template and the icons. And it was interesting and made sense, and actually it was kind of fun, except it was so different than the way she had done things before. And that made her feel a little bit insecure, like she was walking into the unknown. So she decided just to take a quick peek back at some of the slides that she'd made for earlier talks. And then she got thinking about all of her research in its beauty and its complexity and how she was going to fit all of that research into the 5-minute talk. And that led to her feeling confused and overwhelmed and a little bit depressed. And so she called Holly. And Holly said, "The method will work for you if you follow it." So then Sarah went back to the story form method. She used the template and the icons to complete her talk, and then she delivered it to Holly, who gave her feedback using the feedback rubric. And using that feedback, she revised her talk. And then it was time to give it. Remember, her audience were a group of undergraduate recruits. How did the talk go? Well, it went great. First of all, she was the only speaker who wasn't pressed for time. Everybody else ran out of time. Her audience members asked great questions, even though they hadn't known anything about her content before her talk. She had fun doing it, and her advisor was really impressed. He thought it was wonderful. Now, it took some time, of course, more time than she normally would have put into this talk, but it turned out to pay off later because in a couple of weeks, she was asked to give a 20-minute talk to a different group of people, to people at an interdepartmental seminar, and she only had 3 days to prepare. She used the story form template and the icons and the instructions, and she prepared a talk for them. And the results are pretty much the same. They had great questions for her, and then comments and questions that trickled in afterwards made her realize that indeed this talk had really got their interest, it had influenced them and impressed them. Now, why? Well, the reason was that she'd harnessed the power of story to engage her audience, to get them to process what she said, and get them to understand her content. She's got a lot of talks in her future, including a job talk coming up, and she's going to use Storyform Science, Storyform Method, to do all of them. And she recommends that you do too.